Major funding for this program was provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Additional funding was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the Ford Foundation, the Foundation for Public Broadcasting in Mississippi, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the National Black Programming Consortium.
It was Wright who was one of the people who made me conscious of the need to struggle. You understand what I mean? Even though later I come up and say, well, man, I don't agree with that, I don't agree with that. Still, in the sense of him describing and analyzing the whole existence of black people as an oppressed nation, that's priceless.
I was scared. All my life I heard of black men being killed because of white girls, and there I was.
Richard Wright proved that a black writer could write considerably better than most of the white writers of his day. And after Native Son, the condescending attitude toward black writers was over.
He said, nothing comes before my art. For him, his art was sacred. He didn't care about anything else but that. What he had to do was the most important thing.
Few people, I think, can imagine what it had to be like to live under conditions of not only repression, tremendous racist discrimination, but no outlet for talking about it, for seeing a way of changing.
In the early 1940s, I would say that most white Americans never thought about blacks. They never thought about blacks except maybe as maids and porters. And there was no consciousness of what was going on in the country.
There had been objects, there had been photographs, there had been images, there had been simply voiceless.
White people only knew black people in certain kinds of movies and films. It was black musicals, it was shuffle along, the comic routines, it was the wonderful jazz music, of course. I mean, what people talk about in terms of the Harlem Renaissance, the jazz age. All of that was part of or created an imagery of black people that Wright had to transform.
When Native Son came out, all of a sudden, bam, it hit him right between the eyes.
I said he came like a sledgehammer, like a giant out of the mountain with a sledgehammer, writing with a sledgehammer.
I saw the book right after it had come out. I'm sure it wasn't even on the stands. I simply stopped existing. I missed school for at least a week. I couldn't function for 2 weeks.
What stunned American readers about Native Son was its searing indictment of racism. This was unprecedented in 1940. Equally astonishing for the time, it was written by a Negro, the radical young writer Richard Wright. Wright said he gave Native Son everything he had because once America read it, he might never get another chance. It became a runaway bestseller, and he became one of the nation's most celebrated authors.
He had figured out very early on that black people had no opportunity to say what it is they needed to say. And so the fact that he discovered that one could do it in writing and do it ever so articulately meant that millions of people could now have a voice through him.
And he was so fired up by what he was doing. One of the things, characteristics of Wright was his determination and stubbornness.
Wright set his story in Chicago during the 1930s, the Depression years. He knew this city well. Like thousands of other blacks, he had fled the South for a better life in the North, a life most never found. Negroes lived then in what was known as the Black Belt, Chicago's South Side.
And the South Side, if you can look back to those days, was a very tight, restricted area. The black community was held in by restrictive covenants. There was something called the kitchenette, where these apartments, buildings had been cut up. The rent was the highest in the city, and the area had a problem with rats biting babies.
Native Son opens in a kitchenette as the Thomases, a family from the South, awaken. The story's central character is Bigger, the eldest son in a fatherless household.
Bigger, kill it. Kill him. That's enough now, Bigger. You done killed him. Now get him out of here.
I think Wright was very conscious that Bigger was a composite of many things, and one of those is Wright himself. Wright was writing like other people that suggested that the environment had a very strong influence on the individual. He wanted people to say, look at me, I'm human, I suffer, I bleed, my life is miserable, it doesn't have to be this way.
I wish I could be up there like that. I'd go so far away from here.
Forget it.
I could fly one of those things if I had a chance.
Yes, sir.
Damn it to hell.
Hey, man, how can you worry yourself like that? It's just water and draw.
They won't let us do nothing, man.
Who?
You don't understand nothing I'm trying to say to you, do you? Sometimes I feel like something awful's gonna happen to me. Nothing ever happens to us.
What you want to happen?
Anything.
Bigger Thomas is the representative of all black men's attempts to try to come to grips with their own internal demons as well as the forces outside. The problem that Wright understood is that black men have to deal with tremendous problems every day of their lives, and yet nobody understands that. And if you don't understand those problems, you can't have any sympathy. So what he wants us to do is to shock us into recognition.
Bigger gets a job driving for the Daltons, a wealthy white family. That night, he drives their daughter, Mary, to a rendezvous with her communist boyfriend, Jan. Jan and Mary drink all evening. Later, Bigger has to carry Mary, thoroughly drunk, to her bedroom. When her blind mother interrupts, Bigger tries to quiet Mary.
Mary, honey. Mary? Are you all right? Mary, dear. You aren't asleep, are you? I hear you moving about. Everything smells of alcohol. Mary, you've been drinking again.
Here is a young man who, intimidated by the voice of a white woman, representing the power of white lives, a blind woman. He's afraid that this woman will discover him in the room.
And he is so terribly afraid of this white woman and what she represents. He puts that pillow on Mary's head so she can't make a sound. So that murder is very much accidental. And it's important in the reading and the interpretation of the novel for us to understand that it's accidental in order for us to then understand the depth of that fear.
Wright made Bigger's fear the driving force throughout the remainder of Native Son, a fear that caused Bigger to do terrible things. It was this emotion, Wright felt, that corrupted race relations in America.
It was a terror of what might happen if you stepped out of line. Remember, he was a product of the South. Even in its transformed state in Chicago, it was still the South. So you were always having to be on your toes about what you did, because the least little thing you did might cost you your life. For Wright, fear was central to his thinking, his living in the South. It was built into him from the very beginning. Families teach children fear because they want them to survive.
For black families in Mississippi, especially sharecropping families, fear was the main response to a code of behavior whites imposed called Jim Crow.
Very important to understand what Jim Crow meant to a child, to Richard Wright in the early part of this century. He describes part of it to us and for us. That is, when whites, because they're white, have total power over your life and over your death as well, that neither means much to them.
Nathaniel and Ella Wright, Richard's parents, spent their lives under Jim Crow. His father was an illiterate sharecropper. Nathaniel met Ella at a country social in this one-room church and school near Natchez, Mississippi, where she taught part-time. The children of rural black families attended school only from November through February, so in March, cotton could be replanted. Ella and Nathaniel lived in a cabin near the Mississippi River.
He inherited his sensitivity and sensibility from his mother, not from his father. He looked like his father. He probably sounded like him, but he was his mother's child.
Richard, the first of two sons, was born on a plantation in 1908.
And those plantations were all over Mississippi. This particular plantation was 25 miles north of Natchez, and I think it was Ruckus. But the three plantations there together were the earliest habitation for all of his family, his father's people. Travelers Rest, the Huggett, and Ruckus. The land on Travelers Rest was where his father and his grandfather farmed as slaves.